My company is in Rancho Dominguez, Rancho Dominguez. We're actually a CLIA licensed CAP certified lab, which means we're allowed to test patient samples if we want. But what we're really mainly focused on is being a QSR, quality system regulation compliant diagnostic development company, which means we follow the rules and know how to go through the process of getting something that can go through the FDA and get approved. We're currently up to 26 people. I myself, as Ahmed mentioned, I'm a chemist, and really the basis of the company is based upon my chemistry background. I developed a platform that we call DxTerity, and what it is it allows us to do direct testing of multiplex gene expression from blood, from tissue, without doing any sample prep whatsoever. So we can both stabilize it and then test it and do it very inexpensively. It's on the basis of that technology that we won this large contract. To go along with the platform technology, we also have a line of blood collection, blood stabilization products, because we have an optimized buffer that lets you ship samples at room temperature. You get at least 14 days at ambient, and we need so little blood that we actually look heavily at finger stick collection, and that's really what we really push. And the sample of our finger stick collection kit is in the corner over there. We have 2 tests that we are working actively on. Most of our work is spent on what we call ReadyDx. It's the radiation exposure dosage index diagnostic. I'll talk a little bit further quickly later, but basically imagine a bomb goes off and you got 1 million people trying to figure out how much radiation they got and how to triage somebody. And we have a test to do that. And we also are developing a rheumatoid arthritis disease monitoring test. Next slide. So really what we're looking at, and in the end our vision is from home, drop of blood based testing for therapy monitoring. We don't really do genetic testing. We don't do SNPs and mutations. The reason being in our world is as technology evolves, you can do that once in someone's lifetime and you know an awful lot about them at that point. Maybe if cancer develops, you want to identify the new mutations, but we see that SNP business as something we don't really want to play in. What we really look at in gene expression is it really tells you what's happening to your body at a given point in time. And so it's the type of test that you would want to run many times and in large volume to be able to figure out what somebody is like. How are they responding to their therapy? Is their drug working? Are they in control? And that's really what we focus on. And one of the holy grails is the whole idea is you prick your finger and you mail in a blood test and you do cancer screening that way. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this test, radiation exposure dosage index, we are actually partnered with Duke University on this. Won a $43.5 million contract. Duke had developed a gene signature, a panel, in this case it's 29 genes, that by measuring the relative level of expression, you could figure out how much absorbed dose somebody had. And that's really critical in the event of a large scale event, because it tells you who can go home, don't worry about it, you didn't get enough such that you have an immediate threat, versus who can be sent to the 10,000 beds that we actually have in the US for treating people with high levels of radiation exposure. So it's mass casualty. We were named the 2013 CBRNE, Chemical, Biological, Radiological, Nuclear Explosion Product of the Year. And really what we're moving into now is taking this whole thing, because our customer is the government, and many governments, is taking it all the way through FDA, because in this case it's one test that they want to be fully FDA approved, fully cleared, and the contract covers all of that. Now you say, well, that's interesting, what else can you use this test for? And it turns out that 600,000 people each year in the US get some version of radiation therapy to treat cancer. And about 5 to 10% of those have an adverse reaction. They're not particularly tolerant of it. Some cases, especially if it's in the stomach area, it will lead to diarrhea, but if you're really not tolerant of it, it can become life-threatening after the case when you're going in for colon cancer treatment or whatever. It turns out that the genes and radiation exposure, so if you can think about it, is we know how people should respond to radiation if things are good. The flip side is you can figure out who doesn't respond like you would expect it to and use that to segregate the population, and in case to probably treat them a little lighter. We just finished the first part of a clinical study on this and are now moving into the next stage. So next one. Now, what I really wanted to focus and kind of some food for thought on is, I look at it as the biggest challenge facing the industry right now is people getting paid and people being able to establish what we call a clinical utility. Technologies have evolved a long ways. We're hearing everything that's going on in sequencing. So technically, analytically, we're able to measure an awful lot of things out there. We can measure panels of SNPs. We can sequence someone's whole genome. I can very quickly take if this gene list equals this and turn that into a test. But to actually get it paid for, you need to establish clinical utility. So there's clinical validity, which means, does this gene correlate with this disease? But clinical utility is, does it actually help the physician in terms of managing that and become a useful thing? Go back. So prior to 2013, our diagnostic business was based upon, if I can convince you as a doc to prescribe that test, I could get paid for it, because they used to do what was called code stacking. You as a doctor would be the one that would make the decision whether or not you thought it was valuable for your patient's care. And they would then figure out the price based on adding up the steps that it took to get you there, or some other price that may have been negotiated. Post 2013, this has changed, and this led to a lot of diagnostic companies going out of business, because tests that they had been getting paid for suddenly didn't. There was one company called Natural Products Testing up in Seattle that bought products from a lot of the companies, the diagnostic ones, and they went totally BK and left 30 million and some on unpaid bills that had a ripple effect throughout the industry. G News is another company that went under because they couldn't get paid. And it really is now is you have to, it's changing towards, you need what's called a CMS code, where you establish the clinical utility. You present your study to the payer, in this case Medicare, and they say, oh, it's this, it works for that, and we'll pay you this much. Now, or you have to convince people to pay out of their own pocket, but that CMS code is very much used as a guide a lot of times to establish who pays and who gets reimbursed. Now, the other thing right now that's affecting the industry is there's this argument between lab-developed tests, what's called an LDT made by a CLIA lab, and the FDA wanting people to take tests through the FDA for approval. One part is clinical utility. The other part is trying to make sure that the tests are of high enough quality and you really know what you've got enough controls in place to make sure you're getting the results you thought you were getting. It's a big deal because there's over 10,000 LDTs. Most testing by Quest and LabCorp are all delivering LDTs, and there's less than 30 FDA-approved genetic tests out there. The reality is it costs a lot of money and time to go through the FDA. And Quest and LabCorp, the truth is they don't usually buy the kitted FDA-approved tests. They make their lab-developed tests and then deliver it out to the market, which is a big problem because they control about 80% of the US testing space. So if you're a company planning on making a diagnostic and hoping you're going to sell it to Quest and LabCorp, you might be holding your breath. Next one. And this is my last slide. The other thing that's affecting the industry is the Supreme Court ruling in 2013. So 2013 was a lousy year for the diagnostic industry. Between CMS changing and then the Supreme Court ruling through a mixture of two decisions, one called Prometheus and the other one Myriad, that gene tests are not patent protected. Means that if you want me to go run a study to prove clinical utility that's going to cost me $40 million, and then tell me on the other end, not only can I decide what I want to get paid for it, like drug companies get to decide what they want to get paid for it, and I can't keep anybody else from copying it, why would I as a genetic company, a diagnostic company, want to invest in that? It just doesn't make sense. And it's really had, I mean, if you look at companies like me, I mean, the case of our radiation test, I'm being paid to prove that, and I have a customer that wants to buy it. But you really have to look twice in this industry. You're saying, do I want to take on the expense of running a $40 million trial to prove this and not get paid? And the other thing I mentioned is this, there's really, the market for FDA-approved tests is weak, because I actually know of several times where Quest and LabCorp have intentionally gone and bought a packaged, kitted, FDA-cleared test company, brought them inside, cannibalized it, turned it into LDT, dissolved the entity that was there, and then did it just so they could save their money. And that's really tough on this industry if that's going to happen if you want us to develop forward. Next slide. So what do I think is the keys to success going forward? One is we need cheap technologies. You need to have clinical chemistry type pricing. You need to be able to do it sub 50 high volumes if you want to actually make it. You can't count on $3,000 prices to be what carry you through in low volume delivery. We need to solve the validation problem. We either have to come up with new ways to run clinical studies, and one version is doing a crowdsourced trial, where instead of going through KOLs, key opinion leaders at each university, and counting on them slowly coming in over the year or years to get my population, where I use the internet and disease registries and questionnaires to select my patients, and then mail them a sample collection or arrange for them to go get collected, so that you can increase the velocity with which you can do this. Otherwise, it's just too expensive. And in some cases, I really think we need to have structured things with the government where there's some decision made upon that happening. I also believe that going forward, you can't go through this business as if I got one test and I'm gonna build a sales force and go sell it all over. There's gotta be partnering with channel masters, whether those are Kaisers, whether those are the insurance companies, so that you can reduce that marketing expense. Because that's the only way you can deliver a $50 test. I can't spend $40 million marketing if I'm only gonna get $40 for my test. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay,
Sorry.
wow.